Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hello, I'm Patrick Devaney, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. Today we've got a fascinating topic, one that wasn't on anybody's mind just a few months ago, but we are here today to talk about Edtech and being caught in the crossfire of the trade war or pending trade war and what impact that may have on our little industry here. So I've got three wonderful guests joining me today. I'm going to give them all the chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of dive into this fascinating conversation. I think first we'll start with you, Sarah.
My name is Sarah Cluck. I'm the Vice President of Education and Children's Policy at the Software and Information Industry Association. We are a trade association representing a number of companies in the information industry, including companies building products for use in the schools. We work on a number of issues, including now tariffs and the impact of tariffs on education companies.
Welcome, Sarah. And I'm sure we're going to lean on you real early here to learn a little bit more about this fascinating topic. Next, I guess I'll go to Tejas, if I could.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick. Hey, I'm Tejas. I lead business development and strategic partnerships at Wakelet. We are a content curation platform based in Manchester, UK. So for those of you who don't know, that's a 2-hour train ride up from London. We do business in over 150 countries across the globe. The US is our biggest and strongest market. And today's topic is a very interesting one because it surely does impact the way we do business and the way we will plan to do business going forward.
Great. Welcome, Tejas. And last but not least, Robert, please tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself.
Robert Merdlacci, founder and president of Mindshare Learning Media. We are leading Edtech innovation in Canada to empower student success. We really bridge the gap between industry and education, and we're publishers of a weekly e-magazine. We were honored to be recipients of the most recent Tech Digest Award for our excellence in publication of our national e-magazine. That's going out today, actually. So, and I also am the CEO of C21 Canada. We just had an AI summit, and we're really focused on this challenge that we have. Where there's chaos, there's opportunity, I like to think. So I have lots of thoughts on the trade war of sorts that will eventually go away.
Well, we all certainly hope it goes away. I can tell you, I feel particularly inadequate in this conversation. I think that there's not only the kind of recent occurrence or recent surfacing of it, but the fact that it really was very minor on anybody's mind not long ago. And I think probably I want to thank you all for being here, but I also think we probably need to start by setting a leveling the playing ground a little bit. And it might not be fair, but I'm going to lean on Sarah a little bit to help us understand all this talk about trade wars, all this talk about tariffs. Where is it really relevant? Where is it that it comes into play, specifically in the ed tech space? Because an awful lot of what we do is software as a service. There's not a lot of hardware, and I don't really understand what the tariffs impact will be there. So that's a big question, but hopefully you're up to it, Sarah.
Sure. Well, I am not going to go into a deep dive on the economics of tariffs, but I will talk a little bit about how schools buy products, whether it is textbooks or crayons or pencils or software that are not more often than not produced in their local community. So they are buying textbooks where the paper is produced in Canada, or crayons that are produced in China, or other manipulatives that may be manufactured elsewhere overseas. And when the president announced the broad tariff on most, if not all, countries around the globe, we began to see that the price of products would increase for American schools, whether it would be a 20% increase, a 30% increase, or I think 145% increase. there were a lot of uncertainties on what the cost of products would be for the end user, in this circumstance, schools. I think the easiest example for this audience to think about is devices, whether it is a tablet or a computer. Most of those are manufactured overseas, whether it is Vietnam or China. The companies that are importing those, if they place an order, it doesn't come with 2-day shipping. There's usually a lead time of 6 to 12 weeks. And in the period of time of when the tariffs were proposed to when those products arrive, there was no clear final price for the company that was importing those products or for the school. So there's a lot of uncertainty on how much of their budget, a school's budget, would need to be expended on, in this example, tablets or computers. So how much of their budget would they have left to spend on software or crayons or pencils or construction paper or other manipulatives that students might use? So I think it causes, now there's a pause on most global tariffs, but it causes and has caused a lot of uncertainties for budgeting in the education space at a time when American schools are losing, had no longer have the funding that came through some of the pandemic relief legislation and other funding, and a lot of uncertainty on where education policy and education funding is going to go in DC. So I think instead of answers, I've just presented a scenario where there's just a lot of uncertainty. But really for education companies, it is your schools and your partners don't know how much budget they will have to spend on products. And that uncertainty is scary, not just for schools, but for companies as well, because companies like to plan. And the announcement of tariffs, and then the pause on tariffs, and then perhaps another pause on tariffs, that leads to a lot of uncertainty for businesses.
That's the fascinating part about this conversation. There is no absolute. So we can't even dive into the conversation of, software versus hardware versus other products, because there really is nothing definitive yet. The bigger challenge is just the uncertainty and the chaos that is causing.
Yeah, I think we may see some renegotiation of trade deals, and whether digital tools are included in those trade deals remains to be seen. So it's just sort of a lot of uncertainties, a lot of wait and see, and maybe, as I think Robert said, maybe this will go away, or it's here to stay. We don't know.
With that as a foundation, and I think that's a very solid place for us to start. Tejas, can you share, let's start with Tejas, because then I think we got a little different conversation around Canada, but what does this do to your planning as a company that does work in so many countries and has such a large stake in the U.S.? What are you seeing happen both within your organization and how you're trying to deal with it, and then how it's coming to you from school districts?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, to start off, our primary objective from the get-go is to really double down on value for the educator. So the educator that is using us in a district and all of their students. And of course, because of the fact that we have such a large presence across the globe in over 150 countries, we have contested with quite sensitive situations globally over the past several years. I've been here 8 years now, and many things have happened across the globe in those 8 years. The pandemic probably being one of the biggest changes that I've seen in my time at Wakelet. And we continue to see that adapting to those changes is probably something we really need to look at closely. One thing that I will say is that whilst adapting is probably the backbone of any successful company, there is a philosophical shift that's happening in the market where there's this concept of tech sovereignty coming in, where companies and customers within local ecosystem are wanting to be more interdependent with each other, as opposed to relying on services that are coming outside of borders, just because it protects against scenarios like this one, where, trade tariffs, perhaps creating supply chain issues with hardware, maybe to a larger extent now than it will in the long term, yet that can cause a lot of balance sheet discrepancies. And so the more local you do business and the more dynamically you interact with your local ecosystem, the better guarded you are to the more global context of how your country does, business in terms of tariffs and any other measures globally. So to sort of bring that point back across, we expect that going forward, there will be a lot of strong competition for us as a product from homegrown American software providers that do the same thing. We do see that being something relevant to Europe as well, for example, just because that is where the world is moving. Customers are looking for local, customers are looking for companies that can protect against these sort of backlashes. And there's a larger conversation also to be had again about the whole globalist versus populist conversation. And I think we are very much in the midst of an era that is moving to more localized business services and dealings.
I would like to open it up for everybody. I think it's a fascinating comment. I think that it very much could be a real thing, could be real. Is there a downside to that? I understand the protectionist side of it, but what might the downside be?
I think the downside will be more of a measurement we'll be able to see long term. I think it's too early to tell. I don't think there is inherently any issues with there being more heavy and strong local dependence on businesses and services. The only thing that I would say is that the way the current global economy operates and functions, there has been resource distribution and allocation based on supply demand that was built on very globalist ideologies. And so to pivot from that, of course, you're going to have growing pains and you're going to have pains with how industries evolve and adapt. And I think the same can be said for Edtech as well.
Robert, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm never short of words, being the introvert that I am. So the good news for companies who have been doing business in international markets, in the U.S. market, and if you're in the system, you will continue to do business. We just did a report on Edtech's, Canadian Edtech's doing business, thriving in the U.S. market, particularly in the state of Florida. We did an update to that report. And the importance of being in country, having a presence, it's about relationships. And the conversations I've had, many of the Edtechs are reassured that, their relationships at that particular district with the superintendent, if they're strong, if they're happy, they will continue to do business, particularly if it's services, right? If it's an AI tool, if it's not hard goods, you are not as impacted. There are edicts from various states to do business with U.S. companies only. So if you're not a registered U.S. company, that presents a problem. There are provinces who have come out with an edict to school districts that you are required to buy Canadian first. However, if you are in the system, within the purchasing framework, and they can't serve up a solution that is comparable to what's coming from a foreign country, then you'll continue to do business. So there is a silver lining. And I've heard U.S. companies who are bringing in hardware goods to Canada, they're saying, don't worry, we are absorbing the tariff impact. So that I was just at a conference where I heard that very thing from a hardware supplier. So it's not cut and dry, but it's not all bad news. And I'm an eternal optimist. So these tariffs will be renegotiated. They're very much ebbing and flowing, but you have to anticipate You have to address it. You have to take a proactive approach, and you have to diversify. We have a webinar that's coming up later this month on doing business on Edtech's expanding to international markets and thriving. It's still focusing on the US, but looking at other markets. And equally important is winning your backyard. Winning your backyard before you go into another market, having those use cases and best practices and testimonials it's never been a more opportune time to refocus. We always have a tendency to want to go somewhere else before we win our own backyard. And I always advise that win your backyard first, because it says a lot about your company and your focus.
Yeah, I think that's great. Sarah, your experience with policies here, are there indications, or do we typically see a protection of things that are established, or is the disruption universal and not really paying attention to established practices?
Well, I think that the role Edtech played during the pandemic is also going to play in here. If schools found value in the services that were offered through one of their partners, one of their education companies, they're going to continue to want to work with those. But also, if the company, no matter where they're from, is not meeting the needs of their school community, the parents don't like it, the kids don't like it, there aren't the outcomes that they're finding, I think that's an area where we're going to find more, pickiness is the wrong word, but more strategic thinking at the school level. I think that parents have a big voice right now on what EdTech tools and what tools can and should be used in the classroom. And schools, I think, are ready to listen to them. So I think, especially in the realm of areas like accessibility, if the tool is meeting the needs of students that are served by features that are accessible, then the school is going to go out and find the tool that works, no matter where that is from. Granted, it has to meet all of the needs like data localization, like data storage in the US, or in the case of Canada, the Buy Canadian. But I do think that schools are, with constrained funds, going to be picky about things that work. And that's for the best. They should be picking what works best for them. Yeah, I think parents have a very large voice, and students, on the tools that work for them and the tools that might not work. So I think it's going to be outside of the very specific requirements for things like data localization in specific states or in Canada with the Buy Canadian. I think we are going to see schools really focusing on what works best for them and finding the tools that meet the needs of their student population.
Let me ask a question to our international guest here. And that question's one, is this causing damage that goes beyond just the concern and the complexity around the uncertainty and, the ambivalence about exactly what's going to happen? But is it damaging the relationship between the parties beyond that? I mean, are you getting any, and I guess I'd start with you, Robert, because I live close to the border, Canadian, go to Canada for lunch. I mean, it's that close. And it sounds like Sarah was also quite close. Is the damage that's being caused beyond just the uncertainty around tariffs? Is it causing greater relationship damage?
In my world, I have no definite borderline. We're virtual, and we're always having conversations with our partners and colleagues in the US. And, ISTE's coming up. We're a media partner. It's interviewed Charles Fidel from Harvard. It's all positive because we're looking beyond the political realm, and what's most important is, and teaching and learning and helping support kids thriving and preparing them for a future that isn't clearly seen. So for me, I look beyond the noise, and I'm not inhibited and I'm not daunted by this challenge that we have. It's about relationships. And when you have those strong relationships, we're apologizing to each other, constantly. And that's what it's been more about. And it's like, let's just carry on. And when we know, reading between the lines and the turmoil is, there, but we're looking at the reality of, the nuts and bolts of every day, and we have to carry on. And it's about courageous leadership in challenging times. And if you're talking to superintendents, that's what it's about. It's about helping kids and teachers get through this period. And it's a recalibration of relationships, of the tools. What are those essential tools in your suite, in your toolbox that you need to access? And who are the key players that are there for you? And what's the impact of AI in this fast-moving train that is not stopping?
Right. I knew we couldn't get through an episode without talking about AI in some fashion or another.
Sorry about that.
That's quite all right. We'll get back to that. Tejas, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was reflecting on the question as Robert spoke, and I thought back to an article that I read where somebody that was an American business CEO was complaining about the fact that big tech, Apple, Google, etc., have enough cash reserves, enough political power and presence to be able to protect themselves against these discrepancies in policy and tariff. And smaller businesses are really struggling with supply chain dynamics and supply chain, issues where prices have gone up 100, 150%. And I think it raises a very important question of uncertainty. So how long can these businesses, these small businesses, last? How long is this situation in the US going to last? And this is an industry business-wide question, but particularly in EdTech as well, where business is so cyclical. Smaller businesses have to depend on a very particular EdTech cycle to sell to districts, to close deals. Do we have the allowance? Do we have the comfort of guaranteeing that these small businesses are going to be around for the next 5 to 10 years? Can they withstand this short-term turmoil? I think that's a big question to be asked. And that is something that we think a lot about as well, because supply chain turbulence may seem that it has a very micro effect in terms of its environment, but actually there is a macro effect as well, because it changes the dynamics quite a bit in a 360 way in how international businesses do business in the US in this instance, and local businesses do business in US. So that is also, I think, something to think about, and something that we do actively think about, because let's say you get to 2026 and there is still a tariff issue, there is still supply chain disruption, and for some reason, big tech now cannot offset the cost with their own cash reserves. They're putting it onto the customers. All of a sudden, we pay 2x for server costs, and that's a big business expense. So there's a lot of dynamics that are going to come into play that we haven't thought about. But very much, as Patrick mentioned, going with the situation in the way it's evolving currently. But that's not to say that we shouldn't plan for scenarios that may arise in the future, because as business owners and people closely tied to running a business, it's something that you have to think about. I mean, server costs doubling because of tariff restrictions or whatever else may be impacting it can kill several businesses. And I can definitely attest that from Wakelet's side.
It's fascinating. I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but I do just anecdotally know that the vast majority of software businesses have started as mom and pop shops. Their teachers have an idea. I want to go help. And yes, there are larger and there are consolidation as you go up the market, but the large number are very small. Do you see the same parallel there, Sarah, with your members and those? Is there a greater concern from the smaller businesses?
I think everyone is concerned in their own way. I think this is just one additional thing to add to the complexity of selling in the education space, because tariffs are one of many. There's privacy regulations, there's accessibility rules, there's local dynamics. I think this is one of many, and it's always hard on businesses of all sizes for different reasons, whether there are certain thresholds that in legislation or laws that don't kick compliance in until you are big enough, or if it's just you're managing 50 different states with 50 different laws, and well, in the privacy case, hundreds of laws for every across the United States. This is just one more complexity that makes it hard to run a business in the education space.
Yeah. Well, and it's clear. I'm hearing a very loud message about focusing on value and making sure that your message is clear, your message is consistent, and, leveraging those relationships that exist. What measures should we be taking? I think there's good business practice. Is there any adjustment to good business practice that this particular set of circumstances change in terms of how we plan going forward? And we can all go around the horn on that one. Go ahead, Robert. You can go first.
Great question, Patrick. Well, look, I'm an optimist, but there is reality too. And you need to revisit your pipeline. And I know of one Edtech that went down from Canada that had a very buoyant pipeline in the US, and they ran into challenges with superintendents saying, our budget situation is not what it was. So the landscape's changed almost on a dime. And so will there be recalibration, and will there be an elimination of Edtechs? Yes, you can expect this year there'll be many that don't survive because of the current situation. Just look at the stock market, and the crisis there. So revisiting your pipeline and being realistic, and, be mindful of other international markets, whether you're in the US or Canada or whatever country you're in, diversification. And as my high school hockey coach, Mr. Lynch, used to tell me when I was on my path to the NHL, having played against Gretzky in my day, he said, Martellacci, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And thank God I went to university.
And I notice you're not wearing a hockey jersey right now, Robert.
Yes.
No, but I will be playing lunchtime hockey. And here, pass that over here. Something for you. I'm handing back the longevity award that I received last year, having played over 30 years with the faculty hockey team. And my president, who retired on me, was 92. So I got a bit of a ways to go.
Well, good. Many more years on the ice for you. Yeah, Tejas, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was fascinated by everything that Robert said, and it's such a pertinent thing to think about. And as he was talking, I was sort of thinking about the landscape globally. So as I mentioned, I've also been tech ambassador of Aspen Institute. The Aspen Institute's a think tank based in Aspen, Colorado. And overwhelmingly, we've seen this massive shift in funding towards startups in AI. So any startup that uses AI, is trying to disrupt with AI, agentic AI, is getting a lot of investor confidence, risk, etc. Now, this is a big issue as well, because a lot of edtechs that don't use AI, or a lot of small businesses within education currently that are struggling with the current tariff changes and are trying to mold themselves to the new environment, are not getting much investor backing, because investors are looking at AI startups and companies and thinking, like, I'm probably going to do 20x over there, and EdTech, with its cyclical sales cycles, etc., is probably not going to give me anything close to what an AI product could. And so there's also a big question to be asked within EdTech of, is this scenario going to cause a massive influx of companies creating or being created in EdTech that are being forced to adopt AI? And also, what's going to happen to the small businesses currently that don't have AI adoption and need investor confidence and support from the market, but aren't getting any? I think the reality, unfortunately, is what Robert said. I think they will eventually not survive, unfortunately, just because of circumstances and where investor thought process and money is going. And that is also something we must consider as a massive backlash to, as Sarah was saying, tariffs being added as yet another issue that EdTech companies have to contend with on top of privacy, accessibility, etc. And so it is a trying and testing time for EdTech. I think we are seeing a lot of companies go down very sadly. And it's great that we're having this conversation because I think we need to brainstorm these concepts and try and think of solutions quick, or a lot of very innovative and well-meaning small companies, as Patrick said, that were possibly started by teachers, parents, will not survive.
Is there any different advice you're giving to your members? And are you seeing an impact on your membership from some of this uncertainty?
Companies are interested in hearing about what's happening in DC and at the state legislatures. I think that because the news is coming fast and furious, they're looking for places where they can get news distilled down to them so that they can really take action on whatever news is coming out, or decide to not take action and understand that it's just rumors or nothing's happening, or get confirmation that they don't need to pre-comply with legislation that may or may not pass. So I think for EdTech companies that are navigating this, yes, it's a hard time, but yes, it's always a hard time in EdTech when you're in tech and you see your pals on the non-mission driven side getting buyouts, selling their companies, unicorns, all of those words. EdTech and education companies are really mission-driven companies that have a different model and different delivery that they're thinking about. So I think it was funny during the early days of the pandemic, there were a lot of companies coming in and wanting to help education and help schools. And there's a whole dynamic ecosystem in this space that are delivering the tools that need to be delivered, that are accessible, that are safe, that are privacy protective. And I think that is sometimes missed by those outside of this space, that the people in this space are really in it to accomplish what they set out to accomplish and better kids and parents and families' lives.
Yeah. I often say that to be in this space, you have to have a higher calling. This isn't just about money. So we're short on time. I don't want to cut anybody off. I want to kind of summarize a couple of the thoughts here, and then we'll have a chance you can correct the things that I've missed, or, highlight something that I got wrong. But I think we started off with, kind of what is the current state. And it's very clear that there's not a lot defined about changes, but there's a whole lot of uncertainty that's been created. And that uncertainty in its very nature is going to cause prices to increase, somewhat because uncertainty creates panic sometimes, but also tariffs around things, whether they're crayons and paper or other services, there are weeks of lead time, so that, the uncertainty gets compounded by the realities of the world. We are seeing some interesting shifts towards more localization, collaboration on a local level. I personally think that also raises some concerns because it takes some efficiency out of the globalization has gotten pretty efficient, and we start localizing, it's going to take away some of the benefits, but it also may provide protections. We really all tend to agree on the fact that we have to lean into the value that can be offered. We have to lean into the relationships. We have to focus on the good, the quality that has been produced. And to Sarah's point, there are many organizations in EdTech that are doing so, that are doing great things, providing great value, and doing so without huge dollars being returned to them. So the impact of some of these trade mechanisms or trade challenges may be less. This is probably a problem for everyone, maybe some sooner than others, but it is a challenge that everybody's going to have to deal with. And we all also have to think, what happens with technology and what's the impact of AI on this? Are people forced into doing AI? Is AI creating solutions that others couldn't respond to create here? Or is AI a great complement and a tool, but it's clearly going to play a role in some fashion? The short answer is people are, generally speaking, organizations are in this space because they want to help students. And there is a good history of folks not just helping students, but finding new and creative ways to help students despite the challenges, because there's always a lot of challenges in this space. What did I miss? Is that a fair summary of current events or current status?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Well articulated. I think the only thing I would add, Patrick, is to ensure that you're at your top of the game, and storytelling is paramount today. Whether you're a student or you're an edtech company, get out there, don't retreat, be courageous, prove your value, be interoperable with your tools. Accessibility has been a tremendous challenge in putting the tools in the hands of teachers and students. Be mindful of the little details, dot the I's, cross the T's, and work with great companies that are gateways to the platforms and working with education that help enable the whole system to work efficiently and as smoothly as possible.
I can't agree more. I do think optimism is the better way to perceive this. There is opportunity and change. I want to thank all of you for participating. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope our audience has as well. And maybe we revisit this in 2 years or sometime down the trail and say, boy, how have things changed? But and hopefully it's Robert's way. This all gone away, but we'll find out with time. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And thank everybody for listening. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.